Claude 3.7 has landed and I'm so confident in its ability, I'm going to do this whole app build with my eyes closed. Nah, not really. We're just going to give it a vibe check and see if all this benchmarking really pans out, and is this going to make a big difference for us building apps with AI. So Claude 3.7 has dropped, and spoiler alert, I actually have really enjoyed the model in a vibe coding session, and that's what I'm going to step through today. Show you how to set up an entire Nextjs application with Supabase database in the background, and we're going to record some voice notes and save to the database. And I'm going to do this in a vibe coding speed run where I throw away all the rules and we just get straight in and develop an entire app it took about 40 minutes, and I've cut that time down, the inference time, so that you can see all the important steps all the way through. So what makes this a big deal? It's just this one table here, which is our software engineering bench. So you can see here, this is Claude 3.5. That's what we've been used to using for quite a long time. It's the preferred model of most software developers. And look at this jump here. It's just jumped up massively. And then if we use custom scaffolding, we're getting a huge jump up to 70%. So custom scaffolding, as they mentioned in the appendices, is using specific tools like bash tools, directory searches, just to help the model complete the assigned tasks. And what's happening here is that we're using the SWE bench. It basically evaluates itself against these real software issues that exist in the wild and tries to solve them, and then the performance is mapped against that. And what we're seeing here in this whole release is a real move towards the practical applications of these models. Anthropic are not so much focused on benchmarking, they're actually just focused on getting stuff done, and I'm really impressed by that. And you can see it in a change in their terminology, in their thinking and how they talk. They're aligning more with Cursor, they're aligning more with other companies like Replit, and they're doubling down on the fact that they are the default best model for code generation, in my opinion, right now. So they've also dropped something called Claude Code, which is something like a software development agent that you can use in the terminal on your machine. So that means you can basically ask it to create applications, modify those applications, you can commit to GitHub, you can deploy, you can do everything you can do currently in tools like Cursor or GitHub Copilot or Windsurf. It's a pretty cool application, but to be honest, the existing tools do this a whole lot better. I think this is an attempt by Claude to basically get a deeper understanding of how developers are interacting with their agents on their systems, and maybe it might develop into something more later on. But right now, I'm just going to pass on it because after a quick test, it seems to be simply a basic version of the other tools that are out there. So if you like this kind of content, check out switchdimension.com. I've got a whole course and community around building stuff really quickly with AI. And there's also a newsletter there. You can drop your email in and you'll get updates on new tools and new approaches to software development with AI. So I'm going to try something a little bit different here. I'm going to go for a speed run. I'm going to throw away the usual rules, the preparation, all the extra admin files, and I'm just going to do a vibe code with Claude 3.7 just to get a real feel for how it operates natively on its own without all the extra helpers. We're going to build out a small application using Nextjs just to see how it all comes together. So let's go. Up here on the right hand side, we have our AI tab. Now, I don't have the most recent version of Cursor yet. That's 4.6. It's on rolling update at the moment. The difference that you might see by the time you see this video is Chat and Composer will be integrated together and you get to pick between either one. So Chat is what you use when you want to talk about your project, but not necessarily implement big changes. It's more for just deciding what am I going to do next and asking about where files are stored and how the project works. And Composer Agent is where you're asking it to go ahead and apply changes, create folders, create directories, run terminal commands. It's just so you know the difference between those two. So I'm going to make sure that I'm in WSL and I'm using Ubuntu because that's how I work. I work on a Windows machine and I use WSL in order to have a Linux environment. Okay, so now that we've got this set up, WSL is set up, let's go and open our folder, which is Claude 37-test. Again, making sure we've got this one opened and it's asking me to reopen the folder in WSL. It's important that if you're using WSL, that's set up and running. If you're on a Mac, this doesn't matter. If you're on Linux, it doesn't matter either. I'm just going to get completely stuck in. I don't recommend you normally do this. I have lots of videos on how you get your project prepared. I've one recently that talks about how you use 3 experts, a product manager, UX designer, and a software architect to help you create the specifications to get going. And then I have another video on how you actually apply rules to your project to make sure that it stays on Rails. But I want this to be a true vibe test for 3.7, so I'm throwing all that away and we're just going to dive into using the model. I want to develop a Nextjs application for taking audio notes. I want to be able to have an input box where I just drop in my thoughts, and those thoughts are recorded in audio and then transcribed into text in the box, and then I can save those thoughts and access them later. So this is going to be an Nextjs application. I like to use Supabase, and I have no other requirements specifically. Whatever you think is going to be good to get this kind of application set up, I'm open to your thoughts. Now, the other thing I'm going to do, of course, is I need to select Claude 3.7, and I'm going to actually apply the thinking model for this one, because it's initially I'm trying to figure out, have a good think about this before we get started. You might normally do this in chat and then switch over to Composer. So in your version, or the newer 4.6 version, what's going to happen is you'll have this conversation in the chat window. It's going to reason out what the best approach is. You can over and back with it about certain decisions, and once you've both decided on what the best path forward is, you can switch that little tab to Composer and then actually start to get it to carry out all the different commands. But for now, I'm just going to make sure I've got 3.7 enabled. If you don't see that enabled, you can go up here to your settings, go to models, and then you'll see your list of models that you have access to. So first impressions, that was super fast. It's actually given me the thinking behind the model. We've seen this before with the likes of DeepSeek or One, and you'll get this to a lesser extent in O3 Mini. And it's giving me the final notes here. So it's actually scanned through the directory. It's planned for what it wants to create. It's a bit ambitious. I think it's looking to store the audio transcriptions and all that in Supabase. I don't think we need to go that far. Let's just look at the browser API. Let's keep it simple for our minimal viable product. And let's just use the browser API to take the text from the user and put it into the text box. And we're just going to save the text to the database. We don't need to store the audio recordings, and we don't need to use Whisper AI to do any of the transcription. Generally, it's important when you're working on these projects that you try not to bite off more than you can chew. Now, again, I'm really impressed at the speed here. This came back very quick. So let's go ahead and run the command. Would I like to use TurboPack? No. Would I like to customize the import? No. Now it's installing all our dev dependencies. So you can actually enable YOLO mode, and it'll actually go ahead and run all those commands as it goes. And just for fun and speed here, I'm actually going to enable this. Now, I usually don't recommend using this, but just because we're testing the vibe here and testing the edge of what's possible, I'm going to engage it, but I recommend you leave it off, usually just to test and see exactly what's happening. No, I think we're good. Okay, the model is so fast here, it jumped ahead of itself. It hadn't even waited for the install. It did a search of the directory and said there was nothing there, and it said now we need to work on this manually. But everything is in there as needed, so I'm just going to let the model know that. If you check again, you'll see that everything is there. We can proceed now to the next step. So it's scanning through the directories, seeing what it's happy with. Now let's install Supabase for our database needs. It's gone and added those packages. You can see Supabase is showing up here. Now let's create the necessary files for our application. First, let's up the Supabase client. So it's going and setting up this client file over here in our new library directory. It's setting up types for our notes from the TypeScript perspective. It's gone and created a speech to text input component. And then using the linting, it's figured out that it hasn't got, it can't find speech recognition. So it's going to try and solve that problem itself. Went ahead and fixed those issues on its own. Thanks very much. And now it's gone ahead and created a env local example for us. So we'll need to put in our own details here from Supabase. And then I'm seeing here it's giving me this error connecting to Anthropic. Probably got to do with the huge volume of requests it's getting at the moment. So while I'm waiting on that, I'm just going to go and get the details for Supabase. If you've never used Supabase before, it's essentially a open source backend as a service. You can run Postgres database servers locally, or you can run them in the cloud via its cloud service, and it offers you authentication and a whole lot of other things that really make it a whole lot faster and easier to develop web apps. You might have also heard of Firebase, there's PlanetScale, there's so many others. This is just the one I like to use. So let's give it a project. We're going to call this Claude 3.7 test, and I'm just going to give it a password as well. I'm going to delete all that afterwards, and then let's create new project. So I hit resume here, and it's jumped into installing Supabase for our database needs. Again, this is kind of the danger of having YOLO enabled. I almost can't keep up with it. I was just in the process of creating my .env file, and it's kind of run ahead of me. So that's pretty cool. It actually picked up on those warnings itself and amended it. Okay, now let's create the necessary files for application. Let's create our Supabase client file. Now let's create a .env local file with placeholder values. Oh my God, it's just gone and done that itself. I was just about to do that. Now let's create a note app for our application. Let's create a Notes API service, speech to text hook. Oh my God, I just can't seem to keep up with it here. And it's giving me this: we're having trouble connecting to Anthropic. This might be temporary. Please try again in a moment. So while we're waiting for that, back over to our Supabase instance that we set up. And you'll see up the top here, there's this little connect button. So let's click on that and you just go to app frameworks, and then I can click on Nextjs, and it's already actually pasted in here for me everything I need. So I'm just going to copy this. So I've just pasted that in there. It's got my anonymous key and my URL. So, and I'm going to try resume here again, and I'm still getting this: we're having trouble. So I'm just going to try again. Again, this is probably teething problems with this new model, and also the fact it's probably getting a huge amount of traffic right now. Now, it seems to be kind of freaking out here a little bit. Its completions are being cut off. My last complete database, it's gone and installed Supabase, and it seems to be missing its completions here, which is just really kind of weird, and giving me half think models back. This could be just the fact that I'm using the thinking model here. I should probably switch back over to the regular model. Yeah, and that's my bad. So I'm just going to let it finish this run here, and it just kind of blasted here through, and I'm not even exactly sure what it did. I'm just going to accept those changes for now, and let's go out on a limb and see how we did. So if I go to Claude, when I hit npm run dev to see our development server spin up, we're just going to hit return. It should display on our listed localhost 3000. I'm going to click on that. So we're getting progress here. We have some kind of an interface, and it's telling me it's failed to fetch notes. That's fine. It's not fully connected to the database yet. And we're getting one other error here saying error failed to fetch notes. That's fine for now. And then let's see if the API is working. So if I click start listening, testing 1, 2, 3, testing the browser API. That's pretty cool. And I don't know if you can see that there. It's very dark, but essentially it did get the text in. And then if I click save note, I'll probably get another error. So not too bad. And we're not using anything like shadcn here, which I'd normally install. I didn't define that, but it's an okay start. But you know, something similar we get from Replit or Bolt or something like that. Let's just see if we can take it a little bit further. So I'm going to go and switch over to Claude 3.7 Sonnet. Now, the difference between these two models, 3.7 is basically your standard base model, and 3.7 Sonnet Thinking is the step-by-step extended thinking model. So they're pretty much the same thing as far as I understand. It's just that the second one, it's giving more time to do step-by-step reasoning and thinking. It's allowing itself to step through before it jumps back with an answer. The only thing that's different here is the amount of time that's allowed. So I'm just going to stick with this one for now. Now, I do know that in the hybrid model, it'll actually decide itself which method to use, but I don't know if that's necessarily applied in Cursor yet. So I'm just going to try this version of the model, and then I'm just going to go and hit resume. So let's continue building. Let's create the main components for our app, starting with the node component in the main page. It didn't check the context before it jumped into moving ahead. It's gone and done the whole step all over again. So I'm just going to stop this completely. And then let's go back up to a checkpoint where everything seemed to be okay. So let's go back to this point in time. So this is the native restore function within Cursor. Usually you're better to use the commit function with Git. It's just more reliable, but in this case we're just going for it. So it's going to revert all the changes back again. So we're back to the original interface that we have. And if we just check that we're running okay in the browser, let's just pop over, and that seems to be fine there as well. So now I'm just going to call out the fact that we're getting this error. So we just take a screenshot of that error like this, and then we're going to pop back over the cursor. We're in Claude 3.7 Sonnet, we're in agent mode, and I'm just going to say, I got this error when I was trying to save the note. Maybe let's look at the connection to our database to see if that's all working fine. And I'm pasting in the screenshot, and I'm just going to hit submit. So it's asking me for confirmation on an install. I'm going to pop out the terminal, and I'm just going to say Y to proceed. I think this is probably the third time it's tried to install Supabase. Again, this is why I don't necessarily like YOLO. It just flies through way too fast for me. I like to be able to correct the model as it goes. So it's telling me it needs to seed the database, which is fair enough. There's probably nothing in there. So we're going to copy this file here. We're going to pop over to our Supabase instance. And if we go over here to our SQL editor, and then I'm just going to paste. This is going to use SQL to create the tables we need in our database. And so we're going to just go ahead and run that. Let's run it, and it says success. So if we go over now to our table editor, we look and we have a notes table, but we don't necessarily have anything in it. So let's pop it back again to the instructions. It's telling me that I need to verify the table creation, and then it's saying I should restart my Nextjs application. But we did also get this error here about an access token, but it didn't tell me to do anything with that, so I'm not going to do anything. So it told me to restart, so I will. Okay, it says no notes yet, and then I'm going to say testing 1 2 3 testing. So it's in there, albeit it's very hard to see, and I'm going to click save note, and then it says it's saved. Great. Now if we go over to our database, and it is saved, all ready to go. That is pretty quick and pretty impressive. Now let's just check out its style creds. Let's see if it's any good at updating our interface here. So let's just go and screenshot this. Now let's screenshot this version like that, and then just go back over to cursor and then pop it in here. I'm going to say, let's make this dark mode. Let's use an accent color of yellow. And let's try and use something like shad cn for the styling of the components. Now, it'll be interesting to see if you've ever heard or used shad cn with Claude 3.5 before. It always uses the outdated command to set it up, and this causes some hassles and it confuses people a little bit. So I'm not sure if it's going to recognize the new version of the command with this new model, what its training cutoff date was, but let's just give it a go. So it's wanting to install shad cn. Now it's looking to initialize it. Now this is the wrong command. So sadly, it's even with this new model, we're still facing this issue, but I want to see how it might attempt to correct it. So I'm just going to correct the model and stop it here. So I'm going to say the correct method to install is npx install shad cn at latest, and then just hit submit. So how you'd normally get around that, and how I've done so in my rules video, is that you can create rules up here called project rules, and then you can add in a rule to say whenever you're installing shad cn that it should remember to use the correct command. But unfortunately it doesn't always, so you need to keep an eye on that. So, okay, we need to install this. So I'm just going to say yes. Now it's flying through the changes here, and I haven't been stepping through and checking each one. I'm really treating this as a speed run and a vibe coding session. 9 times out of 10, it's going to do the right thing for you, but that one time it could really mess up your code base. You always be using the ability to commit here to constantly save the progress. Now, we haven't done that here in this case because we're just plowing through, but if you follow any of the instructions or tutorials I do in other videos or on the Switch Dimension course, which is helping you to build out apps with AI, and I'll leave the link in the description there. It talks to you about the best practice for stashing changes so you can revert back if something goes wrong. Okay, so where are we here? So it has a few linting errors. It's trying to fix that. And then it wants to install a button card and the text area card. So we're going to let it go ahead and do that. So it's blasted through here. And I think it's tried to install Sonnet several times, despite having done it successfully the first time. Seems to be some context issues here. It doesn't be fully aware of what it's done already. In this case, it hasn't led to any problems. And then it went and just popped open its own window here to try and run the development server on a whole new port. It was running already in a different port it wasn't aware of. So, you know, it's just moving at a great rate here, but probably too fast for its own good. So let's just go and check out localhost 3000 and see if for all this speed, oh, nice. So this is not looking bad at all. So let me just move my head here and let's give you a little preview of what's going on. So we have our audio notes app, and then I can say, so here I'm going to actually use the native listening feature, and I'm just going to hit this button here. I'm testing out Claude 3.7 Sonnet. I'm actually really quite impressed so far. Not 100% sure it's working perfectly with Cursor. There are some context issues. I'm seeing a lot of formatting errors in the response, but usually this is just teething errors. I've seen this happen before when other models are introduced. The Cursor team and the Anthropic team usually catch up with this stuff pretty quick. It's hard to tell from my initial speed run with this, but all in all, it put together a working app connected to Supabase in a very short period of time. So that alone bodes well. So I'm going to stop listening, and then I'm just going to go and click Save Note. Oh yes, and now we've got our notes saved here, which is pretty great. And then if I go over to our database, boom, we have the unique ID, we have the note content, and it's created at timestamp, etc. That is pretty impressive. It was probably about 40 minutes. It probably could have been a whole lot shorter if I wasn't recording a video, and I just cut down some of the inference time in between just to make it more palatable for you guys. But I'm actually really quite impressed. It moves really fast. It feels like Claude 3.5, but it's just that little bit more, I guess, smooth. Smooth is the word I'm looking for here. I didn't hit as many errors. It kind of just flowed that little bit better. There was a few instances of it getting a bit janky, and I think that's more related to the relationship between Cursor and the new model. Maybe it's because I'm on 4.5, I'm not on 4.6 yet. Those things normally get ironed out, so I'm not worried about that. But I do feel that 10 to 15% difference in the model, and I find that quite encouraging and exciting because that amount of an increment just makes it a whole lot smoother and faster to move forward as you're building out these apps with AI. That's going to clock up a lot of time saved as we move forward. What's this going to look like in another 6 months, in another year? What I find very exciting about these new range of models is that we've proven out that extra compute is making a difference. We've seen Grok 3 launch forward by a ton of extra compute applied, and Elon Musk's amazing ability to pull together a server farm in a very short period of time. And we're seeing a similar jump here from Anthropic. And then also this idea of a hybrid model where we can have this stepped extended time thinking is also pushing us up a bit. I also think there's probably a lot of reinforcement learning being used, and that really benefits the type of model that's focused on STEM, coding, or things where we can have a proven output. So what I mean by that is you can use reinforcement learning on these models where you know what the defined answer is. By having that answer, you can use that to train the model to improve and get better. It doesn't work so well in other areas, but in areas like code completion, code development, that's an absolute win. And that's why we're seeing so many jumps in terms of software engineering benchmarks. So if you've got the professional plan in Anthropic Claude, you're going to have access to the extended and the normal version of this model. So normal is really fast inference, it comes back really quickly, and the extended version is pretty much the same model. It's just going to think a little bit longer about the question that you've asked it. And apparently in its hybrid mode, it decides which mode it should apply to your question.